most Azure projects do not fail because somebody chose the wrong virtual machine size. They don't even fail because someone picked the wrong storage application option or because the network address space was not perfect. We can't blame the consultant either. We can't, it's not because they, forgot to enable a specific feature in the portal either. In my experience, Azure projects usually fail much earlier than that. Fail in the first few conversations. Right? They fail when nobody truly understands why the business wants to move to Azure in the first place. Right? Fail when the technical team starts designing a solution before they actually understand the problem. They fail when the customer says, we want to move to the cloud, and everyone assumes that means the same thing. But here's the reality. For one business, moving to the Azure means reducing data center costs. For another, it means improving disaster recovery. For a third, it might mean modernizing legacy applications. For another, it means becoming more secure. For a fifth, it might simply mean that their data center lease is expiring and they have no choice. Look, the same phrase, right? Completely different business drivers. So in this first episode of the Azure Consultant Playbook AI Edition, we're not going to start by deploying anything. We're not going to build a landing zone either. We're not going to configure networking, identity, security or policies or even monitoring. What we are going to do is start where every good Azure engagement should start, with discovery. Because before you design Azure, you need to understand the customer. And by the end of this episode, I want to show you how a consultant thinks during a discovery workshop, right? What questions you should be asking, right? What information you need to capture, and how AI can actually help you turn a messy customer conversation into a structured, useful, and actionable outcome. Before we get into the discovery workshop itself, let me quickly explain how this whole series is actually going to work. So, across this Azure Consultant Playbook series, we're going to follow a fictional customer, right? We're going to call it the IT IT Geek Network or IT Geek Limited Manufacturing, right? It's a small, medium-sized organization with about 500 users. They have a head office in Australia, a smaller office in the UK, and most of their IT environment is still running on premises. They have Active Directory, file servers, they have line of business applications as well. They have some legacy systems and a small IT team that's already stretched. The business wants to move to Azure, but they're not exactly sure what that journey should actually look like. And that is really important because this is what real consulting often looks like. Okay, customers don't always come to you with perfectly defined cloud strategy. They don't always know what operating model they actually want. They don't always understand the difference between migration, modernization, governance, landing zones, identity, security or cost management. They just know they have a problem and they need your help solving it. That is where consultants come in, right? That's where I come in, right? So throughout this series, we're going to help this IT Geek Limited company move from uncertain to a proper Azure strategy, then into a landing zone design, identity, networking, security, migration, cost management, operations, and finally a full architecture review. In every episode, we're going to include what I'm calling the Consultant Copilot Corner, right? Where we're going to look at how a modern cloud consultant can use AI to speed up that process, improve the quality of the output, and work more effectively. The important thing is this: AI is not replacing the consultant in this series, AI is helping the consultant. That distinction matters. Okay, let's talk about why discovery is so important. A lot of people want to jump straight into the technical work because that is the sort of exciting part, right? We want to build, we want to configure, we want to do design diagrams. We want to show the customer how we've progressed. But if you skip discovery, you are making assumptions. And assumptions are dangerous. You might assume the customer wants to reduce cost, when actually their biggest concern is resilience. You might assume they want to migrate everything quickly, when actually they have regulatory requirements that need careful planning. You might assume they want a simple environment when actually they are planning international growth and need some scalability. This is why Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework starts with strategy and business alignment. Microsoft describes the Cloud Adoption Framework as structured guidance to help organizations adopt Azure and integrate cloud into their business and technology environments with methodologies including strategy, planning, ready, adopt, govern, secure, and manage. That is a really important point. Azure adoption is not just a technical activity, it's a business activity. Microsoft's strategy methodology focuses on defining motivations, missions, objectives, making sure stakeholders are involved, and measurable business outcomes before moving too deep into cloud adoption planning. So when we run discovery, we're not wasting time. We're building the foundation for every decision that follows. When I start a discovery workshop, I don't begin with Azure services. I don't ask how many VMs do you have. I don't ask things like, do you want hub or spoke networking? I don't even ask, are you using ExpressRoute or VPN? Because those questions, they matter later, right? But they're not where I start. The first question I usually ask is very, very simple. Why are we having this conversation? That question might sound basic, but it's very powerful because it forces the customer to step back and explain the real reason they're actually exploring cloud, and specifically in this case, Azure. With this fictional client of ours, let's imagine we ask that question and the response is something like this. Our data center lease expires in 18 months. We're struggling to maintain sort of aging infrastructure. Our disaster recovery is weak, right? We are expanding internationally and the business wants IT to move faster. Now we have something meaningful, right? This is no longer just move to Azure. This is about reducing dependency on a physical data center. It's about improving resilience. It's about supporting business growth, and it's about modernizing IT operations. Those business drivers will shape everything we do later. If the biggest driver is resilience, then backup, disaster recovery, availability zones, and recovery objectives become very important. If the biggest driver is international expansion, then identity, networking, regional design, things like latency and governance become even more important. If the biggest driver is reducing operational overhead, then platform services and automation may become more important than simply lifting and shifting virtual machines. That is why discovery matters. It changes the conversation from what should we build to what outcomes are we trying to achieve. So once I understand why the customer is having the conversation, the next thing I want to understand is what success actually looks like. This is one of the most important questions in consulting, right? What does success look like 12 months from now? For our client, success might sound like this. In 12 months, we want our core infrastructure running in Azure. We want better disaster recovery. We want improved security visibility. And we want a platform that can support our UK office without needing more physical infrastructure. That gives us a target, right? It does not give us a complete design yet, but it tells us what direction we should be heading in. This is also where we need to separate vague goals from measurable outcomes. A vague goal is we want to be more secure, right? A better outcome is we want central visibility of security risks across our Azure environment and a defined process for responding to high priority recommendations. Another example of a vague goal is we want to save money. A better outcome is we want to reduce future data center investment and introduce cost visibility across cloud workloads. Here's another sort of vague goal. We want better disaster recovery, okay? But a better outcome is we want agreed recovery time and recovery expectations for critical workloads. Can you see the difference? The consultant's job is to help the customer turn broad ambitions into clear outcomes. That does not mean every detail needs to be finalized in that first workshop. But by the end of discovery, everyone should have shared understanding of what the customer is trying to achieve. Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework highlights that cloud strategy should connect executive intent to measurable outcomes and help align cloud initiatives with business objectives. That's exactly what we're trying to do here, right? We're connecting the technology journey back to the business outcomes. Once we understand the business goals, we can begin exploring the current environment. This is where the technical conversation actually starts, but we still want to keep it at the right level. Remember, this video is not about deep technical assessment yet, right? At this stage, we're trying to understand the landscape. For our fictional client, I would want to know what their current infrastructure looks like, right? Do they have one data center or multiple locations, right? Are they running VMware or Hyper-V, physical servers, or a mixture? How many servers do they actually have? Which applications are business critical? I'd also want to know which systems are old but still important, right? What identity platform do they use? How do users actually access applications today? What does their backup process look like? What happens if the main office goes offline? Now, I would not necessarily ask those questions as a robotic checklist, right? In a real workshop, I will try and guide the conversation naturally, right? I might say something like, can you take me through your current environment at a high level? If I joined your IT team tomorrow, what would I need to know to understand how your business runs today? That opens a door for the customer to explain things like their own, in their own words. And often that is where you find the real insights, right? They might say, most of our applications are standard, but the ERP system is one of the, is the one that everyone worries about. That matters, right? They might say, We back everything up, but nobody has tested a full recovery in years. That definitely matters, right? They might say only one person understands the old file server permissions. That matters as well. Discovery is not just about collecting technical facts, it's about identifying risks. One of the most valuable things a consultant can do in discovery is uncover the risks that are not obvious on the surface, right? Customers often describe what they want, right? But they do not always describe what could go wrong. So I like to ask questions that gently expose risk, right? I might ask, what are you most worried about with this project? Or something like, what has gone wrong in previous IT projects? Here's another one. Are there any systems that the business can't afford to lose? And then a couple of more that I ask. Things like, are there any people, processes or knowledge gaps that could slow this down? Are there any compliance, audit or security concerns we need to be aware of? Again, this is not about making the customer uncomfortable. It's about creating a safe space where they can be honest, right? With our fictional client, we might discover several risks. The data center lease expires in 18 months, which creates a timeline pressure, right? The disaster recovery has not been properly tested. Their IT team is small and they may not have deep Azure experience. They have a legacy ERP system that might be difficult to migrate. They're expanding internationally as well, right? Remember, but their network design was originally built for a single country business. Now we are starting to see the shape of the engagement, right? This is not just a migration. This is a transformation program with business constraints, technical risks, security considerations, massive skills gap, right? An operational change. And that is much closer to real life. Another area that is often overlooked is stakeholder discovery. Azure projects are not just delivered for IT, right? They affect finance, security as well, operations, application owners, end users especially, right? Execs. We have compliance teams and sometimes external vendors, right? If you don't understand who the stakeholders are, you can easily design something that looks good technically, but fails organizationally. For our client, this is the I Am IT Limited company. The stakeholders might include the CIO, the IT manager, the security lead, we've got a finance manager, operations manager, and the owner of that ERP system. Each of these people care about their different things, right? The CIO might care about business agility and risk reduction. The IT manager is going to care about manageability and skills. Security manager, they're going to care about identity, access, logging and threat protection. Finance are always going to cost visibility and forecasting, right? So don't forget the ERP owner, right? They might just care about performance, downtime and support. If you only speak to one stakeholder, you only get one version of the truth. That is why discovery needs to be broad enough to capture different perspectives. A good consultant listens for alignment, but also listens for tension. The business wants speed, security wants control, and finance wants lower costs. The consultant needs to recognize those competing priorities early on, because those priorities will come back later when decisions need to be made. Now let's talk about constraints. Okay, every customer has constraints. Budget is a constraint. Time is a constraint. Skills are a constraint, right? Things like compliance, that's a massive constraint as well. Existing contract can also be a constraint, especially legacy applications as well. Internal politics, all be constraints as well. Although people don't always say that out loud. The mistake some consultants make is designing the technically perfect solution without paying enough attention to what the customer can realistically adopt. Give me an example, right? You might design an advanced Azure environment with sort of complex networking, multiple subscriptions, right? Detailed policy structures, really cool security tooling, monitoring and automation, and beautiful diagrams. But if a customer has a small IT team with limited cloud experience, you've created something they can't operate. That's not success, right? A good Azure design is not just technically correct, it's operationally realistic. For our client in this scenario, we know they have a small IT team. That means simplicity matters, documentation matters, training is going to matter as well, and that operational handover is going to matter. Automation may help, but only if a team understands what has been automated and how to support it, right? This is where the consultant has to balance best practice with practicability, right? It has to be practical. And honestly, this is one of the biggest differences between textbooks architecture and real-world consulting. In the real world, the best solution is the one that meets the business goals, reduces risk, and can actually be operated by the customer after you leave. By this point in the workshop, we should have a much clearer picture, right? We know why our client's exploring Azure. We know what success looks like. And we know the current environment at quite a high level, right? We've understood the key risks, and we know major stakeholders. We've actually talked about constraints as well, so now we can begin forming direction. Not a final design yet, direction. For our client, this IT Geek Limited, the direction might be they need a structured Azure foundation before migrating workloads. They need identity and access control designed properly. They need governance so resources don't sprawl out of control. They need a quite good migration plan that prioritizes business critical workloads carefully. They need cost visibility from day one, right? They're going to need security and monitoring included early, not added as an afterthought. And they need documentation and knowledge transfer because the internal team will need to operate this environment long term. This is what good discovery gives you. It gives you direction. And that direction will shape the next episode, where we will start translating the customer goals into an Azure landing approach. Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework describes the ready methodology, and it's for preparing the Azure environment and landing zones for workloads, while the plan methodology focuses more on kind of preparing things like people, processes, and technology for cloud adoption. So discovery is not separate from from the technical work. Discovery feeds that technical work. Before we move into our first Consultant Copilot Corner, if you are finding this series useful, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. This series is designed for cloud engineers, architects, consultants, IT managers, and anyone who wants to understand how Azure projects are approached in the real world. Also, drop a comment below and let me know this, right? Have you ever worked on a cloud project where discovery was skipped? Was it rushed? Or was it treated like a box ticking exercise? Because I can almost guarantee some of you watching have seen projects where the team started building before they truly understood the business problem. If you want me to share the discovery questions and workshop template I would use for a customer like this IT Geek Limited, let me know in the comments as well, because I can turn that into a downloadable sort of source or a follow-up video as well. Right, so now let's bring AI into the process. Welcome to the Consultant Copilot Corner. This is a part of each episode where we want to look at how a modern Azure consultant can use AI to improve the way they work. For this episode, I'm going to focus on discovery. Now, discovery workshops generate a lot of information, right? You have meeting notes, you have transcripts, you have action items. You have stakeholder comments as well, right? You have technical details, you have business goals, risks, we talked about that. You have the questions that were answered and questions that still need follow-up. Traditionally, a consultant will spend hours after the workshop cleaning all this up. You might have a Word document full of notes, a follow-up emails, some follow-up emails, a spreadsheet of actions, and maybe a rough architecture diagram. Then you would manually create a discovery summary or workshop report. AI can make that process much faster. For example, after a discovery workshop, you could use Copilot to help summarize the meeting transcript. You could ask it to extract the business drivers. You could ask it to identify the technical requirements, right? Or create a risk register. You could actually ask it to group action items by owner as well. Or you could ask it to highlight any unanswered questions. But here is the important part. You should not treat the AI output as the final answer. You should treat it as a first draft. Because AI might summarize what has been said, but it may not fully understand what it meant. That is where the consultant's judgment comes in, right? Let's say Copilot extracts a requirement from the customer meeting that we have, right? The customer workshop that says, customer wants to migrate all servers to Azure within 18 months. The junior consultant might document that as a requirement and move on. An experienced consultant would challenge that. They really need to migrate all servers. Are some workloads better suited for SaaS? Are some applications ready to be retired, right? Things like, are there systems that should be modernized instead of migrated? Does that timeline actually allow for any testing? We know about the IT team, right? Does the IT team actually have capacity to support the amount of change? This is where AI is going to help you move faster, but your expertise is going to help you move correctly. Practical prompts you could use after a discovery workshop might sound like this. Review the following customer discovery notes. Summarize the business drivers, technical requirements, key risks, stakeholders, constraints, assumptions, and recommended follow-up questions. Organize the output in a format suitable for an Azure Discovery Workshop summary. That kind of prompt can save you a huge amount of time. But then you review it, okay? You refine it. You remove anything inaccurate. You add context based on your experience. You turn it from a raw AI output into a professional consulting deliverable. That's the real value. Not AI instead of the consultant, AI plus a consultant. At the end of this process, we should have a clear discovery output. This does not need to be a huge document. In fact, I'd argue that a clear, concise discovery summary is more often more valuable than a massive document nobody's going to read. For our client in this scenario, right, the discovery output should explain why they're adopting Azure, what business outcomes they want to achieve, what the current environment looks like, right, what risks have been identified, what constraints exist, who those key stakeholders we are that we talked about, and what the recommended next steps should be. This becomes the foundation for the rest of the engagement. Also protects you as a consultant, right, because when decisions are made later, you can trace them back to the agreed discovery findings, right? Why are we prioritizing disaster recovery? Because resilience was identified as a core business outcome. Why are we designing governance early? Because a customer wants to avoid uncontrolled cloud growth. Why are we keeping the initial landing zone design simple? Because the internal IT team has limited Azure operational experience. Why are we not migrating everything at once? Because the ERP system is a business critical system and it requires careful assessment. This is how discovery creates alignment. And alignment is one of the most valuable things you can give a customer. Before we wrap up, let me share a few common discovery mistakes I've seen before. The first mistake is making the workshop too technical, too quickly. If the first 30 minutes of the conversation are all about subnets, private endpoints, VMs, you may have already lost the business stakeholders. There is a time for technical detail, but discovery needs to start with outcomes. The second mistake is only speaking to IT. IT is critical, but they're not the only stakeholder, right? Cloud adoption affects finance, security, operations, application teams, and the wider business. The third mistake is accepting every requirement at face value. Sometimes customers ask for things because that is what they already know, right? They might say, we need another server. When the real requirement is, we need a better way to host this application, right? Those are totally different things. The fourth mistake is not documenting assumptions. Assumptions are dangerous, right? When they stay hidden. If you assume the customer has tested backups, document it and validate it. If you assume an application can move to Azure, document it and validate it. If you assume the customer has internal Azure skills, document it and validate it. The fifth mistake is treating discovery as a one-time event. Discovery starts the engagement, but learning continues throughout the project, right? As Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework notes, strategy is not a one-time exercise and should be revisited as business conditions, regulatory requirements, and the cloud footprint actually evolve. That is really important. It's a really important mindset. You don't discover once and then stop listening. You keep learning throughout the project. So where are we now? Right, we've completed our first discovery workshop with our client. Right, we know they are facing a data center deadline. We know they want better resilience. We know they are expanding internationally. We know their IT team is small as well, right? We know they have legacy systems and business critical applications. We also know security, cost visibility, and operational simplicity are going to matter. Now we are ready to begin translating that into an Azure foundation. And that is what we will cover in episode 2. So in the next video, we're going to design the Azure landing zone for this client, but we are not going to design it randomly. We're going to design it based on what we discovered in this episode. We'll look at subscriptions, management groups, identity considerations, right? We'll look at governance and security foundations, as well as networking direction and how to keep the design realistic for a 500 user organization. And of course, we will include another consultant Copilot corner, where we're going to use AI to help generate a first pass landing zone design. Then review what it gets right and what it gets wrong, and what a real consultant would change before presenting it to a customer. If you found this video useful, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications as well so you don't miss the next episode of the Azure Consultant Playbook, the AI edition. Also, hit the like button if you want more real-world Azure consulting content rather than just sort of portal demos and exam theory. And let me know in the comments what you would ask during a customer discovery workshop. What is the one question you think every Azure consultant should ask before designing anything? I'll be reading the comments and I may include some of your questions in future episodes or build them into discovery workshop templates for the series. Thank you for watching, and remember, great Azure projects do not start with resources. They start with understanding the customer.